Well, it looks like it's time to start the session, and I'm getting feedback from Aneela and Maddie at Launch Minnesota that they are having issues. They are running out of, are not able to get in on both the audio and cameras. So for those of us, I think I see 90 participants in the session. I've got my fellow board members here with us. So I'm going to flip the switch and turn into a moderator orientation here live and in person. By way of introduction, my name is Jodi Hubler, and I have the honor and privilege of serving on the Launch Minnesota board with my colleagues here with us today. We are going to go around and introduce ourselves. In addition to serving on the Launch Minnesota board, I had the privilege of leading a healthcare services venture capital fund here in the Twin Cities for the better part of 15 years. 5 of our portfolio companies were here. Of those, 2 of those were de novo starts. I now serve on a number of venture-backed boards, early stage, even pre-revenue here in the Twin Cities in the med tech and health tech space. So pleased to spend some time with you today and have an opportunity to talk about that. We'll start, Rick.
Hi, Rick Huebsch, Executive Director for Technology Commercialization at the University of Minnesota. And our office helps contribute 20 to 25 startups per year to the startup ecosystem in Minnesota. We work with the researchers at the University of Minnesota. In addition to that work, our office helps provide Discovery Launchpad services to startups that apply through the Launch Minnesota program. And the university in general provides a lot of educational content, including a lot of the Lean Launchpad training that's provided to anyone in Minnesota, as well as sponsoring events like Minnesota Cup and Grow North and much, much more. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Rick. Dave.
Well, good morning, everyone, and greetings from up north. Hey, my name is Dave Hengel. I'm the Executive Director of Greater Bemidji, the Economic Development Lead for North Central Minnesota, and I'm also founder of what the original Launchpad in Bemidji, and kind of our version of a one-stop shop for startups. And we started that about 8 years ago now. Finally, I serve as the Launch Minnesota hub for Northwest Minnesota as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. Al?
Mm-hmm.
Good morning. Al Cornish, General Partner at Generator. And for those of you who are not familiar, Generator is a nationally ranked accelerator and venture capital fund that brings together startup founders with investors, corporations, and others in the entrepreneur ecosystem. My role at Generator, I sit on a Generator leadership team, so significant input to overall firm strategy, revenue growth, company programming, DE&I type strategies, and also lead our efforts with the MSP Equity Fund, which is a multi-million-dollar venture capital fund investing into diverse founders.
Awesome.
Glad to be here.
Thank you, Al. Ben.
Hi, Ben Wright, Vice President of 3M Ventures. So 3M Ventures is our corporate venturing arm. We have internal incubators that's trying to build new startups for 3M inside the company, and then we do external venturing, investing in outside companies as a way to partner with outside companies. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Ben. Sunny?
Hi, I'm Sunny Han. I'm the founder and CEO of Fulcrum. We're an early stage startup focusing on software for manufacturers. We're about a year and a half after our Series A, approaching a Series B milestone. I have started the company here in Minneapolis and have used a bunch of resources here to help us scale up and grow faster than some other friends that have started companies in San Francisco and New York. So really thankful for the Minnesota ecosystem. I also do a light amount of angel investing in town, 1 or 2 deals a year.
Awesome. Thanks, Sunny. Christine.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Beech. I'm one of the 2 higher ed representatives on the board, representing St. Mary's University of Minnesota and the Kabar Institute for Entrepreneurial Studies. The university is part of the Launch E1 network in Southeast Minnesota that we'll talk about a little bit later in the session. I also run a women's entrepreneur forum in Rochester that supports women founders. And I'm an entrepreneur, having founded Copia Via, a startup strategy company for startups and nonprofits. The expertise I bring to the board is focused on the connection between education and entrepreneurship, connecting students and startups, and helping students launch their businesses.
Awesome. Thank you, Christine. Ashley.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Excited to be here, as everyone said. Director of Communications at Target, which I love and enjoy. Been doing it now for 2.5 years. Prior to that, I led communications and marketing for a corporate venture capital group out in Silicon Valley. So to carry on Christine's trend, I think the expertise I bring a lot is the branding and the communications and marketing for startups and positioning for growth. And as Sunny said as well, I do some angel investing here in the Twin Cities, and I'm just very happy to talk to all of you guys today. So thanks for being with us.
Awesome. Thanks, Ashley. Xavier.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Xavier Frigola. I'm a scientist, PhD in immunology, who eventually found its way managing a technology incubator in Rochester, and 2 seed funds in which we were, in most cases, the first check to those companies. Now I'm part of Mayo Clinic's endowment and corporate venture capital arm, and I've been part of the Launch Minnesota board since its inception in 2018.
Awesome. Thank you. So that's our team today. I also see our fearless leader, Aneela, here. So I'm going to turn this back over to you to help moderate. Welcome.
Hello. You have to love it when technology works. Can you hear me?
We can.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today. I am so fortunate to work with this group of individuals with such immense expertise across the state and various industries. For those of you that might just be joining and are just trying to learn more about Launch Minnesota, I want to share that Launch Minnesota is really empowering and elevating our state's innovation ecosystem. We are doing that by 3 key areas. We're increasing access to capital. We've given out almost $5 million in just a few years. We're increasing statewide connectivity. We have a hub and spoke model all across Minnesota, connecting corner to corner to help startups start and scale and navigate their journey. And we want to make sure that you as startups have the resources and talent you need to succeed. And so we're providing lean startup education, the Minnesota Exchange platform, and a variety of other things. So that's just a very high level of what we do. And it's this board that makes it happen and helps guide us today and how we want to move in the future. So thank you for joining us. And this is an incredible opportunity for all of you to ask these individuals their advice. So we have some questions set, but this is an Ask Me Anything session. We want to make sure that your voice is heard. So please put your questions in the chat or come on camera and ask a question. We will be monitoring that. Anyway, we can get started with some of the questions that we have prepared. But please use the chat to ask other questions. All questions are fair game, and I would use their advice, their expertise, their insight. They're here to answer your questions. So let's first start off on our really we can break it down into some of our goal areas. And the first goal, as I said, is access to capital. So Ben, if you could just kind of answer on a high strategic level, what do you, when you're reviewing applications, and this board, this is a working board. These people are incredible. This next month, they are reviewing 70 applications. That is a lot of time that they put in reading these applications, learning about the great problems that you are all solving. But then when you look at these applications on a really strategic level, what are you looking for when you look at the value proposition, the viability of a company, and the market need? What's your advice?
Thanks, Aneela. So first thing I want to say is that this is really a unique opportunity for startups in the state of Minnesota. So when I was in a startup, we did not have an opportunity like this, and some of this funding would have been really crucial to get right off in the early stages off the ground. What do we look? So I think you heard from the introductions that we all bring a very diverse background and diverse perspectives into the board discussion. But we're really looking for, I think one thing that we see consistently across all of the members, we're looking for promising startups that are innovative and scalable And that's really what we're trying to assess. So we try to bring in a venture capital mindset, just like we would as investors in our day jobs. So things like, is there a pain point that is clearly identified? And is that pain point, is there evidence in the market that there's money or that the pain point's really a problem? And then does the solution that the company is proposing somehow address that pain point? We also look at the tech, what if we can get some assessment of how this company might be differentiated and what the moat would be going forward. And then we look at the team. Do they have the credibility? Do they look like they have the passion and commitment to make this startup successful? We really want to bet on the startups that are able to eventually raise more capital from other sources moving forward, and really, in more than just raising capital, be successful commercially. So those are some of the things we look at. I would say one other just logistical thing, as Aneela mentioned, there's a large volume of applications. So I would encourage people that apply to make sure that you take the time to fill out the required fields in the application and have a pitch deck that's well done. And it just makes our job much easier. And it also kind of speaks to maybe the commitment of the team to put the time in for the application.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you for all you do on the board. There's a question in the chat now from Amy, one of our innovation grantees, who's doing amazing work. And she's curious, as a board, and anyone can answer this. I know many of you are familiar with the Angel Tax Credit. How is the board working to reinstate and support the Angel Tax Credit to help startups in the network? I can also answer that from the deed perspective. And I guess I can start, and if there's anyone on the board that would like to jump in after. We know how important the Angel Tax Credit is at the state level. It should be in base funding. We need more of it. Unfortunately, the Angel Tax Credit allocation for this year has been fully allocated. We hope that can be reinstated next year and be in base budget and have a lot more than $5 million. We know it drives investment from outside of Minnesota, and it really helps our startups grow, hire new people, increase, and prosper in their community. We know the great value. We just need to share that with others. And really, it's a lot of education that needs to be done with our legislators and our communities that we're in. Anyone on the board that would like to talk about the Angel Tax Credit?
Aneela, I'll come
Jodi.
in behind you on that one. Sure, absolutely. I think speaking to what the Launch Minnesota board does, I just want to highlight or emphasize Aneela's role as our leader, that there is an expectation that all of us in our spheres of influence and our areas of outreach have an opportunity to then speak to the value of the Angel Tax Credit. So each of these individuals could come off mic and talk about how they talk about Angel Tax Credit and its importance. We are also using other areas. Medical Alley Association is weighing in heavily, not only at the legislative level, but at the business and community economic level. We're also trying to make this an effort where we can push a nonpartisan what's best for the state of Minnesota to be competitive in a job growth and economic and innovation aspect, that flywheel that creates the next Medtronic, the next Target, the next, to understand the importance and the vitality of this.
Thank you so much. All right, I think we'll go back. I don't see any other questions in the Q&A or the chat. Oh, there is one
other question. Yeah.
Okay, is the Angel Tax Credit Program open to private investors or investment groups only? It's available to both. So Maddie will put into the chat the link to the Angel Tax Credit Program on the Launch Minnesota website. There's a place for investors to go and for businesses to go, and the investor side, it can be through either an individual or a group. All right, keep the questions coming. The next question, we're going to go back to the innovation grants. And Ashley, when you review a grant, what would be your advice to startups when they're applying, in the sense of the kind of the brass tacks of filling out this application, what you look for, the conversations we have at a board level. You know, these grants, we look at them internally with an internal review committee, and the grants are also then are reviewed by the board. So these are highly competitive grants. The current ask since we've started has been $16 million, and we've been able to grant about $5 million. And so, Ashley, this is competitive. What's your advice for those startups that have limited time, but this undiluted funding is really important for their business growth?
Yeah, thanks, Aneela. And I guess I'll start out by saying thanks to those that have applied and are expressing interest. I think it is really humbling, and it is a big honor to sort of review these ideas and to see this energy and excitement from the startup community and entrepreneurs around the state. So thanks for sharing with us. And thanks for taking time to fill out the application. We've worked hard to make it easier, more digital, I think, and we know it's long, and we really appreciate you guys taking the time to fill it out. I think Ben hit on some really good thoughts. I'll double click into. Highlight the who behind the application. I think a lot of what we look for is the people behind the idea. So why should we also invest in you as well as the idea? What unique attributes and advantages do you bring to the startup and to what you're building? I think is important for us to understand. Share knowledge of the industry that you're operating in, right? We're not experts in every industry and sector, so help educate us a little bit on the market appetite and the industry that you're operating in, and show us why you're excited about it and passionate about the growth and the market opportunity for this idea and for this technology. Is something we really care about as well. Ben mentioned, we bring in a investor mindset into our process of reviewing, but this is not traditional VC funding. This is a government initiative, and this is government funding. So, like I think a lot of perhaps traditional VCs are looking at, near-term profit is not the number one thing we are reviewing and judging on. We are looking for long-term sustainability and scalability, and we are proud to be first checks, second checks for a lot of these ideas. So just know that as well when you're thinking about the application, and emphasize why Minnesota, right? We're really proud to be helping scale and grow the entrepreneurial community here. So. Share that with us. Why is Minnesota the place to grow your idea? And perhaps I'll package and say simplicity kind of is a fun one as well. I love the expression as a communicator. If I had all the time in the world, I would write you a short letter. I think it's really hard being short and concise, but as much as you can, brevity is helpful too. So clarify your key messages and themes and be as succinct as possible is good.
Thank you, Ash. Really great advice. And we know the benefit of launching a business here in Minnesota, right? One of the top 5-year business survival rates. The Twin Cities was just acknowledged for being the top 4 emerging tech ecosystems in the globe with Startup Genome. Amazing traction that we've had. And so we feel really good about what Minnesota can offer. Sunny, as a founder on the board, you have a really unique perspective, and that founder focus is so important to the work that Launch does, but also your voice on the board we really value. When we look at the grantees, and I know you've been part of some of the grantee gatherings that we do, and we bring our startups together to try to share as that peer network, but whether it's on the grant side or on the seeking investment side, what advice do you have for the startups and their journey?
Yeah, I think there's a huge amount of value to being able to get a grant early on in your journey. If you were able to raise really early angel capital, that money is going to be really expensive. And even though it's a modest amount of money compared to receiving a $500,000 venture round or something like that early stage, you can use that money to test a lot of things that otherwise you wouldn't be able to test So I think there are things that you can always do to be scrappy early on, to just go visit your customers and figure out if you have any commercial viability. But there's a lot of things that, having $10,000 to $50,000 will really help you access and help you de-risk some things and figure some stuff out. So I think it's a really good opportunity to do that. I think also broadcasting that you put together a pitch, got a grant approved, and are working on it is just a really good way to message that this is something that you're serious about. It can help you attract people to talk to you. It can help give you a little bit of a wedge in to open a conversation with somebody. And I think lastly, this process of pitching a group of people like us, even if we don't approve your grant, we almost always try to give really good feedback. And that feedback can be really valuable as well, and doesn't prevent you from applying again in the future. I think one thing that I would try to tell myself early on is that I thought that I needed to have all the answers, like it was some sort of school assignment. But really, the realism is that you don't have everything figured out. That's the whole point of starting a business and working forward from it. I think what you're trying to demonstrate is that you have some thoughts, you have done some thinking, you've done some studying, you have some unique perspectives. But there is no shame if everything that you think you knew is completely proven differently, as long as you get to the right answer over time. So that would be, I think, my overarching advice is just to think of this as something different. It's not about getting capital to be able to, make your business a success right away. It's about getting a little bit of money so that you can do some experimentation and some more discovery that you might not be able to afford on your own.
No, those are great points. And I just do want to call out how purposeful our board members are when they go over every single grant and discuss each grant individually, how purposeful they are and wanting to share feedback with founders. And they're always saying, okay, take a note, let the founder know this, let the founder know that, please share this. Everyone on our board and internally here at Deed, we want to see our startups succeed. And many times they've applied even twice or 3 times. And then as their business has progressed, then they're ready for the investment of the innovation grant. So I highly recommend, if you've applied for a grant in the past and you have not reached out to the launch team, we have feedback that we want to see you be successful. And you can reapply and get that feedback. There is a question in the chat here that I think we should answer. Is there any way to get extra help with an application? Also, what are the timelines once you apply? Maddie, if you could put that webpage in the chat so they can see what our process is. Maddie LeClaire, who's on the screen, is the Launch Minnesota Program Specialist. We're thrilled that she's on board. Maddie and I will talk to anyone applying for a grant ahead of time. Also, our grant team is happy to answer any questions. Once again, we want you to succeed, and we are here to make sure that you can submit the best application possible. Currently, we're going to be reviewing those 70 grants next week. I'm sure the board members are counting down how many grants they need to review now every day until we get to that time. And then we have from September and October, grants that are submitted will be reviewed in November. So that's the next timeline. Okay, I don't see any other questions, so we're going to move back to the board. The investment and seeking capital is always what we hear first from businesses, right? They call me, they say, how do I get in touch with investors? How do I find capital? We know that we need to do a lot more than just capital, right? And that's what Launch has also tried to address, is that network, that strong network, the education, the connection, the undiluted capital and links to experts. But regarding the investment part, Xavier and Jodi, maybe we'll start with Jodi. We've seen tremendous gains with our VC community. Minnesota has ranked so high, I think about 1.8 billion last year. We just continue to rise. What advice do you have to founders that are seeking investments and trying to make that first call to the angel investor, the first call to the VC? Where should they be? Kind of the do's and don'ts, if you have any advice there.
Sure. Well, I also want to call out to you and Maddie that I'm seeing people ask questions in the Q&A and also ask questions in chat. So I'll encourage both of you to go back and forth between those two. Some questions are coming up in the chat. I think the best advice that I'll start with is actually working backwards and listening to what you've already heard, right? Sunny's articulation about the normalizing to the role of a founder listening to Ben and Ashley talk about the ability to really articulate what you do, balanced with Sunny's comments that you need to give yourself some grace that you're on a journey. And so first and foremost, I would encourage people to even head out to the National Venture Capital Association's website and familiarize yourself with the language of venture capital. There's books, literally one of the gold and black books of venture capital for dummies. You're going to be heading in as an N of one to investors that do this for a living and might see 300 deals a year, 300 deals a quarter, but they see more deals than your one. And trying to normalize yourself to some of the language, normalizing yourself to finding even potentially some advisors that can give you a perspective about, what are they talking about when they're talking about, most people know pre-money valuation or they hear about valuation, but what's a ratchet? What's a warrant? How do I start thinking about some of the protective provisions that are there for me? That's language that, like in any other discipline, just like you're learning about capitalizing your business or go-to-market language, you want to learn that language of financing. It helps to normalize that. I think the other is to normalize that you're always raising capital. You never know, and you'll hear these amazing stories. It could have been on the Metro Transit. It could have been on a flight. It could have been on an elevator in a conference. You're always raising capital. And Ashley's encouragement for that simplicity, practice with your friends and family, maybe this weekend at a bonfire, on a walk with a friend around a lake. Practice that 2-minute speech. Practice that if somebody asks you what you do you have the ability to articulate that into something that's really meaningful and can help you? And then back to this portion of venture, because it's not like you're going to get stuck in an elevator with a venture capitalist and be able to walk out with your $5 million check, but normalize that you're going to be able to build those relationships and always end with, if not you, then who? This is about the relationship building. This is about that if you have come to that opportunity to meet Ben at a conference, you see Rick at the walleye tank competition, and you're asking who you should meet. As you're leaving and thanking Rick for that introduction, you also just want to walk away and say, hey, Rick, it might not be a fit for the University of Minnesota because of the tech transfer components of it, but can you think of others? If not you, then who should I be meeting? And really ask those questions about how you can increase your network effect. So normalizing your need to understand this part of the life cycle of your business, what is venture, being able to increase your relationship base and taking advantage of the simplicity of your pitch and always telling your story about your impact and that you're seeking capital, and then continuing to build relationships where you have the opportunity to get yourself in front of people. And then finally, when you get that moment, it's about that preparation. So it comes back to what Ben and others have already said, right? That you've got the articulation of your promise, your vision, your scale, your point of where you are, your use of capital, and then really starting to build out that pitch pace, just as you do your go-to-market strategy and other aspects. So I'll leave it there, Aneela.
I'm going to jump in. We have a couple questions in the chat. Are you looking for startups where all team members are from Minnesota, or if only one of 4 is Twin Cities based, would that be a ding or a reason to rule out?
For the grant requirements, I can let the board answer, but the business has to be headquartered in Minnesota. And we understand now in a virtual global economy that not all employees will be in Minnesota, but the company has to be headquartered here and based here.
Okay, thanks. There's a VC fund that sets aside some money for lifestyle businesses. For example, startups that make a difference in the community, but may not be high growth. Have you considered something like this?
I think one of the points of the board having a diverse set of backgrounds is that we all argue for different things. Personally, I'm less interested in approving grants if it is a close race with something that's more of a lifestyle business versus something that's more high growth. I think it fits the charter mission of creating jobs and creating new businesses that are meaningful in the state. That doesn't mean that those businesses are unvaluable, but that's my personal perspective. I also think that one of the things that I do is I try to advocate for businesses that might not have a business model yet or know how they're going to make money, but have a lot of market potential. So that's my personal advocacy on the board.
Let me just chime in to just realize we're operating under legislation as well, and the legislators decide under Launch Minnesota what the intentions and objectives of the program is. In this case, they want to do high growth, scalable businesses or entrepreneurs or startups. And just realize, reach out to your economic development folks. There are other resources out there to help lifestyle type businesses as well.
Yeah, that was going to be my point. Is that a Launch Minnesota grant may not be the ideal funding for a lifestyle business. However, there are a lot of different sources of funding that you can look at, and so again, economic development, others in the entrepreneur ecosystem can help advise you on that.
And we'll put a link in. We were just at the DEED open house this morning for startups and small businesses. We have a one-pager that lists all of our different training, our funding, and some of our various resources. So we'll put that in the link so everyone sees it. But I believe, too, the last question was really dealing maybe more with the social impact companies. And we've seen some social impact companies that we've granted. Some don't fit our criteria, but all very important for our economy, for sure. Maddie, any other questions you'd like to address? It looks like she might be frozen. Let me see here. And then are there any grants available currently for small veteran-owned businesses? Yes, and we will put that in the chat. That was part of that one pager that I just discussed. And you can be, I see a question about, even though it's a Delaware C Corp, as long as you're headquartered here in Minnesota, that you still qualify. So that works just fine with our qualifications. And any grants for SBA owners, individuals living with disabilities. There is some grants, not the innovation grants, but maybe some other funding sources with Indeed that I will share in the link with the one-page overview. All right. Well, let's get back then. I don't see any other questions. So Al, just because you were just on, you're doing some exciting things in our VC world, working with Greater MSP and Forge North and launching your own VC firm. And I know you've also helped a lot of startups individually. What is your advice when they're seeking dollars? How do they, from the family and friends to the grants to the angel tax, when they're ready for angel funding, excuse me, how do you help? How do you guide these founders to find the capital they need to be successful?
Yeah, thanks for that, Aneela. I think one is, I try to encourage creativity, and meaning that there's a lot of pools of dollars that startups can access. We talk a lot about venture capital funding, and just by definition, we're talking about private equity funding where investors fund startups in exchange for ownership stake in future growth. We talk a lot about VC funding, but there's also under that umbrella accelerators similar to Techstars or where I work, Generator. And at Generator, for instance, we'll invest $100,000 in a business and provide you with concierge services and resources to help you grow your business, hopefully go from good to great. And so that's one of the things I really like to talk a lot about, is that sort of creativity. There's corporate venture capital dollars. There's crowdfunding. There's revenue-based financing. The list is almost endless. So I try to really work with businesses and help them understand their business models, financing needs, and then guide them toward an area that I think is best for that business. In doing that, I emphasize really understanding your financing needs. Like, you aren't raising dollars because it's the popular thing to do, but because you've done an analysis. You have a deep knowledge, a quantitative knowledge of the money that you need and how you'll use those dollars. So I think that's one of the ways that I try to really guide businesses when working and thinking about funding.
I see a chat question here. Can you talk a little bit about your vision for Launch Minnesota for the future and how it aligns with other programs that help startups?
All right. I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? For some reason, the audio on my end went.
Oh,
Maddie, I
sure.
don't think
Can you
we
hear
heard
me?
you. Can you? Yeah. Can you? We can hear you now. Can you repeat the question again?
Yes. Can you talk a little bit about your vision for Launch Minnesota for the future and how it aligns with other programs that help startups?
Does any board member want to take that, or would you like me to? I'll start, and then I'd like to see what the board members might have to say on this. Launch Minnesota is really here to empower and elevate our innovation ecosystem. We have an amazing state full of incredible people and organizations, nonprofits, working every day to help our startups. So part of the reason Launch was created was to help better coordinate, connect, convene these efforts, to really be a catalyst in our ecosystem. And so what we would be doing in the future is just continuing to make sure that those innovators, thought leaders that want to launch new businesses, we make it as easy as possible for them to be successful and give them the tools and the resources that they need. Would anyone else have any?
Neil, I'll just say that I think it's a extremely exciting time in our ecosystems. That's a great question. And I think the possibilities are endless of where we can go with Launch Minnesota. And so I think there are so many different organizations doing great work in the ecosystem as it relates to diverse founders, as it relates to looking at growing angel investors. All of this work is connected. So I think we have an opportunity as we go forward to really connect Launch Minnesota to some of that work.
Yes, and for those that might not, Rick, you go ahead, please.
Yeah, no, I think it's all those C words that Aneela uses. It's connecting, convening, and catalyzing. I think this is kind of the on-ramp for many of the startups. It's really not the point to kind of control the startup ecosystem. That's not the point. It's really to catalyze it, and it's important for the state of Minnesota to have a role in it. But again, it really relies on the community, as many people on this call have said, and it's not just a metro thing. It's the state of Minnesota collectively working on this, and I think that's another key part of it. This hub and spoke model is incredibly important to have it have this ecosystem be in all corners of the state and really leverage the local and regional aspects of it.
No, well said. And I think just to follow up on a couple of those comments, Launch Minnesota being in government is a neutral convener. We, regarding geography, regarding demographics, regarding industry sector. And so in addition to funding and creating more access to capital, what we're really doing is leveraging local, regional, statewide, and even national resources and best practices to bring here to see our founders continue to be successful. So with our Launch Minnesota network, and we can put the link in the chat there, we have a hub and spoke model across the state where about 80 different organizations meet and connect on a regular cadence to help start and scale startups. And so if you're a startup in Southwest Minnesota, there's a group of individuals that are working that if you connect to one person, you're then connected to a whole regional network that is then connected to a statewide level. And so we're just trying, we know that connected and coordinated ecosystem and that strong network increases the rate and the success of new business formations. And so that's really one area in addition to the funding that we really feel strongly about and know kind of sets Minnesota apart compared to some other states.
Aneela, I was just going to add in terms of the future, I think what a lot of us on the board are passionate about is the state. And to include myself, that's what attracted me to this. And I think we have in Minnesota a lot of the elements to make an excellent startup ecosystem. We have a highly educated workforce. We have a quality of living here in Minnesota, apart from January winters, is really pretty good. And we've got more corporations than most metro areas. So there's a lot of elements here, but there's still a lot of opportunity on the startup ecosystem. I mean, if you just compare it to other ecosystems like Austin, Texas, or Silicon Valley, there's a lot more we could do. And so that's what we're here to do. That's why I volunteered to be on the board. I really want to make our startup ecosystem great, or help it.
Thank you. Maddie, any other questions? If not, I'll go back to the board. All right. I think we just brought up too about this is a statewide approach, and it's not just in the Twin Cities. So we are purposeful in our advisory board, which we do have some open positions. So if anyone's interested, you have until October 15th to apply to be with this lovely group of individuals. But it's really a statewide effort. And so we're very purposeful on who's on our board and and that's set by legislators. And so we want 3 individuals from Greater Minnesota to make sure that voice is heard. And so we have Dr. Christine Beech, we have Dave Hengel, and we have Xavier Frigola. Xavier, you have to say it. I don't want to do it. I've only known you for about 10 years. How many years have we known each other?
Yeah, we're acquaintance.
Yes. So
Xavier Frigola.
But I talk about, maybe we'll start with Christine. What have you seen in your local ecosystem in Southeast Minnesota with St. Mary's University and the Rochester community? It's a thriving area with a lot of our innovation grantees come from the Rochester area. Talk about what's working there, maybe, things that you see could be improved, but just your perspective in Greater Minnesota now being connected to the statewide network.
Sure. Yeah. So the idea in Southeast Minnesota, there's so much going on down there right now. We have a lot of medtech entrepreneurship happening, but we have all kinds of entrepreneurship happening. And as part of the launch network, we have this E1 as part of the hub and spoke model that's here locally. And I just can't emphasize enough what they're doing for the entrepreneurs, because there's 16 organizations so every organization that someone might come in contact with to help entrepreneurs is probably part of the E1 network. And so if they plug in there, so then they get assistance from that one partner, but then that partner can refer them to someone else, let's say for a loan, and someone else maybe for some startup programming, and maybe because of the region, they can pitch at the regional competition that gets them qualified for MinCup. So I think the key here is when people are saying, how is Launch working with local partners? They're working with just about anybody who's in the space of the ecosystem, connecting them together. And so the partners come together, they talk, and they have conversation about how they can meet the needs. And as a result, usually they're referring people not just within the region, but also across the state. And when you think of some of the companies like NanoDropper and, Spave and some of the others who have they've been able to get grants, and they've been able to, Spave was acquired. A lot of good things are coming out of the support from the local hub and spoke model. So I would say most people, once they start trying to launch their businesses, the best thing they can do is plug into the network that's there where they are, and then that can connect them throughout the rest of the state. Does that answer your question?
Thank you, Christine. And then Dave, I know you've been an advocate since you're, an inaugural board member about Greater Minnesota and the difference between the Twin Cities and the metro area versus Greater Minnesota, and some of the things why it looks different, but it's still growing and succeeding. So do you want to just share your perspective as a leader in Greater Minnesota?
You bet. And really, I see a couple of really big differences. And I know most of the folks on the call are Twin Cities based, which is great. And we are certainly all in this together in the state of Minnesota. But there is differences between outstate and in the metro area. And a couple that I think of in particular in my region in Northwest Minnesota, first is simply geography. The region in my region is the largest in the state. It's larger than many states, much less a region. And so it's about a 4-hour drive from corner to corner. And so you think about that and you start to realize how difficult it is to build a really, truly regional startup community in the truest sense of the word. And so our response to try and deal with that is simply that to build a network of local-based navigators to really serve as those entry points. People want to work with people who are local, and so we've got a series of navigators set up throughout the region that are those entry points, not into our region, but also into, of course, the state system that we've created. So whether you're Crookston, Thief River, War Road, Bemidji, doesn't matter. You have the access and support connectedness right there. The second difference I'll say is just realize in many of our rural regions, particularly ours, we're still in our infancy in dealing with the regional ecosystem. And we've, despite the fact that some of Minnesota's greatest founded companies like DigiKey and Polaris and Arcticat and Marvin Windows happened in our region, we're still in our infancy. And I do credit Launch Minnesota for giving our region the nudge it needed to start focusing on startups and the resources we have available to them. And so since we're in many ways starting from scratch, we need to collaborate more up in greater Minnesota to make sure we're sharing resources, sharing expertise. And so we've really got this really close network of organizations that work closely every day to support our entrepreneurs and connect us to the statewide system. And so that, again, is something the state of Minnesota through Launch Minnesota created. And so the hub and spoke model really does matter throughout the state.
Thanks, Dave. And Chave, being in Rochester, you've done incredible things growing your investor community with the Southeast Capital Fund. I know you were part of that at that inception. What I'm really proud about is conversations that are happening all across the state, understanding the need of engaging more individuals that could be angel investors and showing that this is really a way of giving back to their communities. As we talked about the value of our angel tax credit, right? They're helping businesses launch, they're hiring employees, they're helping their community be even more thriving. Chave, talk about what Rochester has done with their Southeast Capital Fund and just kind of the need for local individuals, high net worth individuals to think about angel investing as a new way of giving. I'm so pleased to hear that the fund is 3 times larger than the original fund. That's amazing that the community has received it so well and wants to continue to give in that manner. Any insight on that?
Yes. So perhaps to preface with that is keep in mind that, and you know that the ecosystems outside of the metro area lag behind what you see in the Twin Cities. In the Twin Cities, you probably take for granted the Go for Angels, the Startup Weekend, Beta, and all these organizations that we just don't have outside of the metro area. So in some cases, we kind of have to start those things on our own, and that requires first passionate people that want to work and help startups and entrepreneurs, and that's what we were lucky to assemble a coalition. And we knew we had a pipeline of new ideas that would turn into high growth companies, especially having the Mayo Clinic and all its scientists in the neighborhood. But it took us probably a good 6 to 7 years to turn that idea into something that the community was comfortable. It took us to fund the few first of them, and those companies grow a little bit to then be able to assess a coalition of 50 investors. Some of them were physicians that were high net worth. Some of them were local business people, but all of them had the same passion behind that they wanted to put money back into their own backyard and see their own community be developed. That's how we launched the first fund. It was a $2 million fund. It also took the selfless effort of a lot of people to help us do it, because it's not large enough to sustain full-time people doing it. And then when that proved somehow successful, we were able to bring more people that were hesitant to invest in the first fund into a second fund, which is now, I think it closed at $7 million. And that proves that with time and effort and a little bit of support from organizations and even the state, because the angel tax credit brought in a few people that would have not come on board, then you can slowly transform your community.
All right, thank you. I want to get to Rick now. Launch Minnesota, in addition to connecting individuals that are entrepreneurial support organizations across the state in the Launch Minnesota network, we know it's important to bring so many different sectors together, and higher education is critical in our innovation ecosystem. It's a key component. And so Rick and Christine have been generous in hosting a higher ed network for Launch Minnesota over the last year, where we bring together colleges and universities to discuss how we can better increase their engagement with Minnesota's innovation ecosystem. Rick and his team at the University of Minnesota is also one of our statewide partners with Launch Minnesota, and provide a whole host of resources for startups that are now available to everyone across the state, not just the faculty and students of the University of Minnesota. Rick, if you could, and you've just been in the Star Trib and the successes, congratulations on all that you and your team have done. Tell us, in your perspective, kind of your role at the university with the tech transfer office, the importance of higher ed in this ecosystem, and why it's so important for you and others at the U to partner with Launch Minnesota.
Sure, thanks, Aneela. Yeah, I think the first point is, as a research institution in the state of Minnesota, the University of Minnesota does play a large role in providing what I would call research-based or technology-based startups into the community, and our team helps partner with those researchers at the University of Minnesota to generate startups. And like I think the culture, not just at the university, but in the state of Minnesota, has improved over the last 10 to 15 years, and specific over the last 5 years, that it's become more common and more repeating as a standard way of transferring technology out of the university to go through the startup route. So that's kind of one. But as the number of universities and institutions, higher ed institutions across the state of Minnesota, I mean, these institutions, large and small, are really educating our future workforce. And workforce for the large companies, as Ben mentioned, there's lots of large companies, but also the entrepreneurial workforce that might be needed for the future startups. And sometimes the students themselves are generating the startups, and sometimes it's providing those educational opportunities and that kind of entrepreneurial bug that you want to plant in students. And a lot of those courses and coursework can also be very applicable to any entrepreneur in the state of Minnesota. So part of collecting all of these higher ed institutions together is to really just share some of those events and curriculum and best practices that oftentimes are present in the business schools or in the entrepreneurial studies schools, like Christine has run in the past. Those are the programs that are providing that entrepreneurial education. Secondly, it really gets back to that regional aspect. A lot of these educational institutions are core to the region that they're in. They're not all located in the Twin Cities. So whether it's Duluth or Bemidji or St. Cloud or any of the areas of the state that have higher ed institutions, they're really part of the fabric of that ecosystem. So it's important that they play not only a role of educating the students that are attending those universities, but also that they can be a part of the ecosystems in the communities that they reside.
Thank you so much. And we have about 5 minutes left. If there's any other questions, I do see one about how we score and how do we, why are some awarded and some not, and how do we share that feedback? And like I said earlier in our session, we internally, there's a score sheet, and there's certain criteria that it's being evaluated. Same at the board level, there's a scoring process, and those scores are then combined. And we encourage anyone that's been denied to reach out to Maddie or myself, and we will walk you through your grant and provide suggestions internally and some suggestions from the board. We want to see you be successful, and sometimes that feedback is really important to help you as you proceed in your entrepreneurial journey.
I see one question in the Q&A, and maybe this would be a good final wrap-up question. When you think of thriving startup ecosystems, the Twin Cities and Greater Minnesota are rarely mentioned. How do we change this? What is the missing piece of the puzzle, and what are the steps to get there?
That is a good question. I think we've made tremendous momentum As I said, the Startup Genome ranked the Twin Cities #4 in the globe, #2 in the nation. We've had record years with our venture capital raise. We are getting more and more calls from investors on the coast. A lot of different metrics that we're watching is really aligning Minnesota to really excel. And I think people know now you don't have to go to the coast to find innovative companies. It's right here in Minnesota. And I think the difference for Minnesota is every founder I talk to cares so passionately about the problems that they're solving. And I think that shows in the businesses that are being launched. But to your point, we know we cannot be humble in Minnesota, like the Minnesota Nice that we're known for. We need to be louder. We need to be bolder. We need to make sure that that message is shared broadly. And I know with Indeed, but also partners across the state and organizations like Greater MSP and others, we are working together to purposefully share that message at a national level, but also a global level. Board members, what would you say to this question?
I continue to hear from those that we have a really, really fast growing private and traditional VC capital group here in Minnesota. And I think when I speak with a lot of folks that are investors, I continue to hear more and more of their focus on pulling in and representing startups based here to investors and groups on the coast and outside Minnesota. And I think that is a big goal for a lot of people that invest in Minnesota that are based here, is to represent externally outside, to draw more people in. So that momentum and that energy has been really encouraging. And I'd say it's our responsibility too, as board members here, to be talking about it, to be showing up in conferences and events externally to talk about the growing ecosystem that we have here. And I think a lot of eyes are on it nationally, and it's small steps, but it is happening, and I'm encouraged by it. And the role of big corporations too, right? Minnesota is a place with a lot of large, strong Fortune 50 companies. We know that, and I think there are a lot of startup and entrepreneur support programs of large companies here that we are trying to take advantage of, and that we're trying to get creative with and talk. And when we think about partnerships, to do more with peers outside the state as well.
I would say that the founders and businesses that we've seen in the previous 20 years are going to look very different. The founders in the next 20 years are going to look very different. So we have to ensure that as we make this transition in Minnesota, that as we're seeing more diverse entrepreneurs in the state and looking to move possibly to the state, that we have enough funding, whether it's grants, whether it's being able to attract venture capital funds here, that those founders feel supported, those that have been traditionally left in the funding process across different funding areas, that we ensure that we have mechanisms in place and are really thinking creatively about how those founders can thrive in the state of Minnesota.
Anyone else?
Just real quickly, I know that in my 35 years in economic development, the state of Minnesota has never promoted itself. It's never marketed itself throughout the nation, and as businesses, you all know what other states do. And so I think the first attempt this legislative session was to get some funds to help market Minnesota, and that obviously not much got done in the legislature this year. So this is a place where I think all folks on the call today could make a difference by advocating to your legislators, not just marketing funds and to promote Minnesota, but also launch Minnesota. Someone asked about the future of launch. The future of launch is we need to invest more of our state resources in startups. It's pretty clear, and you play a role in that as startups to share that voice.
I think I want to echo what Aneela said. Something that I'm guilty of myself is that we do have a really humble and silent culture in terms of talking about successes as well as failures. And I think that we need to change that if we want to have more outsized returns for startups. And that includes being, encouraging of people to leave the comfortable places, these big Fortune 50 companies that are here. I think that's a mixed blessing for us, but also to not passive aggressively or directly judge people for having failures at companies that make no sense at the time, But those are the types of risk appetites that we need if we're going to create large outcomes for these startups in the ecosystem.
I love the saying that failure is not the opposite of success, it's part of it.
Correct.
And so, yeah, our risk culture needs to continue to grow and evolve on that. I think it's a great question. I think it's to really create a thriving innovation ecosystem, it's going to take all of us working together, breaking down the silos, being collaborative, having everyone at the table. And even if you're not a founder, you need to get involved, through your wealth, your wisdom of your work. We need you. Those of you that are in Fortune 500 companies that are really good at HR or really good with market and research, our startups need you. And so we're going to continue to try to make sure that the voice of our founders are heard, and that we continue to grow every single day our innovation ecosystem so Minnesota can stay nationally and globally competitive for years to come. So I just want to thank you as our time has come to an end, to the founders and startups with your grit and tenacity out there every day, waking up and solving big problems. I want to thank the legislators for the continued funding, the entrepreneurial support orgs that work with startups every day, our investor community, and of course, this board of advisors. Really, truly honored to work with each of you. You each bring such a unique perspective and help guide our state's innovation ecosystem. And so that I will be forever grateful. So enjoy Twin Cities Startup Week. I know every day is packed. Please reach out to Maddie or myself if you have questions after this session. Thank you, and we'll see you at the next Twin Cities event later today. Bye-bye.
Hi.